give a little background, I'm a film student in college right now, and my buddies and I are always trying to find new locations to film our movies at. I make horror films, so all the places I'm looking for and exploring are abandoned. And tonight, me and my group of friends, there were 10 of us total, decided to check out this abandoned hospital down the street from our school. They had been there before and said it was a great spot for filming, and I should check it out. Tonight was that night. So when we get there, I have my Nikon DSLR out with a handheld LED light attached to the top of the camera to scout the place when we get inside. I didn't film any of the encounter because I usually only film the inside of these places, but I had my camera and light out to shine the way through. I was leading the way down this narrow path that led to these walls that we had to climb to get on the roof of the place where we would access one of the rooms to get inside the building. Because I was carrying my camera and bag, I was trying to look for another way up. So I walk a little further down this narrow path, and I start noticing a lot of clothes and random shoes and cardboard boxes lying around the area. There was even an empty sleeping bag. That's when I knew that we probably weren't alone, and were likely going to run into someone if we made the wrong move. And boy, did we ever. One of my friends walking behind me down this path notices a door to my right. It's closed, and my guess was that it was locked and not worth trying. But he already has his hand on the door handle and starts tugging. I look over, and it barely cracks open, but something is holding it from the inside. I shine my LED on the inside, and I see a shirt tied to the inside door handle to another part of the room, acting as a lock. But my friend, being the way he is, tugs again and rips that shirt right off, and the door swings open. Inside, there is someone sleeping on like a table or a couch, alongside with a group of terrifying looking people sitting by a light inside that room, and they all stop and stare at us. In the short glimpse that I got, my friend yells to get out of there and slams the door and just bolts past me. I was standing there a little shaken, almost feeling like I should apologize, but I just follow him instead. My other 8 friends are already on the roof at this point, ask what's going on, and we just run for our lives out of the area. I hear the door in the path swing open, but I couldn't look back. From there, me and my friend rendezvous back to a higher part of that area, away from any entrance leading to the hospital. There's a small gap that you could jump across to get to one of the roofs of the buildings that my other friends were on. About 4 of them follow us and jump across, ready to get out of there, but the others stay on the roof and watch us stuck like statues. I look at them, confused at what they're staring at, and I begin to hear this metal dragging on the concrete. I turn around, and there is a crazy-looking man, maybe mid-20s, dragging a baseball bat with nails all along the end, walking towards us as he drags the bat along the concrete. My heart sinks. At this point, I turn off my light, and all that's shining is the moonlight. I keep my hand on my pocket knife, desperately trying to think of anything to do if he starts swinging, but I knew there was no way I would come out alive if I tried anything. Plus, I gotta take care of my camera. So he walks closer to us, and the first thing he says is, "You're gonna want to keep that light off." And everyone is silent. I am practically shaking. He then starts circling around us as he says, "You guys are never gonna come back here, right?" He walks past me and sees the camera and raises his bat, saying, "And you're gonna put the camera away?" And I just barely say, "Yeah, it's off." He looks over to my friends watching on the roof, past the gap, and he points to them, and he says, "Jump," and they stand silent. The guy says again, "Jump across right now. Just run and jump. You'll make it." Keep in mind the gap doesn't look that bad, but the drop is fatal if you don't make the jump, and my 4 friends are all staring down at the drop, fearing what could happen. One of them says, "I don't think I can make it," and the man replies, "Run and jump, or else you're gonna regret it." So my friend steps back, runs, and barely makes the jump. From there, one by one, the other 3 make the jump across, all while the man is standing right behind us with his bat, dragging it along the concrete. Once we all got across, he says to us, "You're never coming back here again, you understand?" And we awkwardly apologize and run away back to our cars in the distance. I get in my car and look back at the area, and he's still standing there, watching us with his bat as we speed off. I lived in the middle of nowhere in Canada. It was an old town that had quite a few abandoned buildings due to absence of residents. Me and many friends were tired of the lack of entertainment options for us, so what we did was explore these abandoned buildings. Prior to the experience I'm about to talk about, we never had anything too crazy happen to us. Occasionally, we'd see a small bit of blood-like liquid, and we did see a pentagram on the ground, from someone who went to a house previously, but nothing too bad, until the last time I had gone exploring abandoned buildings. Now, when I was younger, I used to go to a daycare that was part mental hospital. Weird combination, I know. It closed down due to a lack of patients and lack of children at the daycare. I decided to go back there with my friends a few years ago. For context, I was 15 when this happened. Most of my friends were the same age. When we did get there, it was rather cliché. There was fog, it was rather dark, and there was a light drizzle of rain. We went to the main gate, which was padlocked shut. We decided to help each other hop over it and made a ton of noise. We were laughing and giggling the whole time, unsuspecting of what was to come. We looked around the small place with flashlights we had on our person. Even with our somewhat powerful flashlights, our visibility was rather limited. We decided to enter the decaying building. Glass and dirt crunched under our feet as we stepped into the daycare section of the complex. There were still old Legos, wood chips from previous furniture, old torn dolls, and toys strewn about. The further we walked around the daycare section, we naturally became more and more silent, until all we could hear was the crunch of the dirt under our feet. The further we walked around the daycare section, we naturally became more and more silent, until all we could hear was the crunch of the dirt under our feet. I found some crayons in a plastic container in the corner of the room. I walked over to pick them up when all of a sudden we heard a loud crash coming from behind a metal door leading to the psych ward part of the building. My friends and I all looked at each other. As a whole, we were a group of 5. Most of them were very bold and cocky. We all looked at each other when my friend Brian suggested we go and look to see where the sound came from. Personally, I was not too fond of the idea, but with my group of friends, there was no way anyone was going to decline such a thing. We all stacked up on the door and opened it. It was rusted to the floor, and we heaved to get it open. As we walked in, the metallic smells and must became stronger, with a hint of something else which I couldn't put my finger on at that moment. We walked in, our flashlights pointed in every direction, with Brian leading the group. The hallways were tight, and to the left and right were the occasional metal doorway, some with doors open. I felt slightly claustrophobic, and it felt a little hard to breathe. As we continued, Brian shone his flashlight into a room and recoiled. We all stopped walking as Brian slowly entered the room. "What is it?" I asked him. "I thought I saw someone here. It seems all fine now." To be honest, I thought he was just messing with us to increase our anxiety, but looking back, I think he was completely honest. He backed out of the room and we continued walking deeper into the psych ward. When another friend swiftly told us to stop, we came to a halt and all listened. In the distance ahead of us, we heard the subtle pitter-patter of footsteps echo through the hallway. We all looked at each other, fear in each of our eyes. Brian continued walking toward the sounds. We considered turning back for a second without Brian, wondering if some ghost or something was in the building, but we couldn't do that to him. The closer we got, the more I felt like I was being watched. When finally we entered a room on the right which had the smell of rotting meat. In front of us was a dead deer. A friend of mine had a very weak stomach and vomited all over the floor. That's when we heard whispering from somewhere. Brian shone his flashlight to the corner of the room where a man with short hair was standing with his head down. He wore a bright green t-shirt stained with what I assume was blood, and torn beige pants. He did not have any socks, and his feet seemed damaged. He was twitching sporadically and continued to mumble even after we saw him. We stared at him for a solid 30 seconds before he made his first true movement. He looked up at us with a haunting grin that sent shivers down our spine. "You guys here for the feast?" He said each word with varying inflection and energy. This kicked us over the edge, and we bolted out of that room all the way back to the daycare center. The door was still open, and we decided to try and slam it shut, but the rust and pure weight of the door almost kept it open. It took 3 of us pulling with all of our strength to close it, and just before we did, I could still see the silhouette of the man watching us, his white teeth being the only other human feature I could see. As we sat behind the metal door, catching our breath for a second, all looking at each other for confirmation that we all saw the same thing. After a little bit of labored breathing from each of us, we heard a light tapping on the door. That's when we decided that it was time to leave. We booked it out of the vicinity completely and ran home. A year after we visited that spot, police went back to do a routine search of the area and found the man. It was stated that this guy used to go to the psych ward before it closed down. He escaped the facility he was transferred to and lived off of the wildlife around the complex. One of my favorite activities is exploring old, abandoned buildings. I've seen quite a few strange things during these trips, but one experience still creeps me out to this day. A few years ago, I found a long-forgotten water refinery through the help of online exploration communities. Although it's risky, I always go to places for the first time alone, partly for the thrill and partly because if something bad were to happen, I would feel terrible having brought someone else into that situation. So I make plans to head there the next day after my classes let out. The day of the trip, I pack up my camera and water bottle and set off following my hand-drawn map. The downside of not having a printer. After an hour or 2 of biking, I finally arrive at the place, which luckily had an old bike path dead-ending just past it. It was completely overtaken by vegetation, with trees growing up through and around the buildings. Not to mention the actual buildings were just disintegrating, with paint peeling off every wall and ceiling. I took my time, scouring each of the buildings, looking around for anything interesting. I found hundreds of broken windows, weird broken spheres, and some kind of giant oven. After an hour or 2 of successful exploring, I decided to head off, happy with an SD card full of pictures. Soon after, I pulled my bike back out through the hole in the fence. I entered and started biking away. I remembered there was one last shot I wanted to get. I'm pretty insistent on getting the shots I want, and I didn't know if I would ever come back, so I decided to just tough it out, ride back, and take the picture. As I was going back, I saw a lone man dressed in old clothes walking down the bike trail away from the dead end. I thought it was kind of a strange path for someone to take a walk on, and something in me said, "Don't let him see you go in there." I biked past him and gave him a slight head nod, and figured I'd bike all the way to the end of the trail, turn around, and by the time I got back, he'd be long gone, having continued in the opposite direction. I take my time to get to the end and turn around, and as I head back toward the hole in the fence, I see him there, staring at me, and walking back toward the dead end from which he came. He had a happy look on his face, but it wasn't the kind of happiness that made me feel at ease in any way. The best way I could describe it is he looked like he had just been told a very dirty joke and was trying to contain it. I knew I had to do something as I was literally trapped between him and a dead end. I decided to play it cool once more, but be ready to drop everything and run if things got hairy. I'm silently cursing myself for going back for one picture as I slowly get closer. Finally, I'm about 20 feet away from him, and he calls out, "I sure would like a ride. It's so hot out. Mind if I jump on?" As soon as I hear this, I realize this is no longer my brain falsely interpreting something as creepy. I pick up speed and rush past him, putting as much space between us as I can. I now look behind me and see that he's once again turned around and following me. At this point, I bolt, sprinting down the bike path back onto the road. Interestingly, I stop at a nearby gas station on the way home to get a refill on my Gatorade. I see a cop there and told him I just rode down the old bike path by this park. He looked at me, sort of bewildered as to why a person would ride out there, or at least that was what I guessed from behind his sunglasses, and he told me he didn't recommend people going there, especially alone, as some shady characters like to hang out there.